Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of the Tactical Breakdown Show, the show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal and break them down in a statistical and analytical way with the help of some expert insight. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Drew Thompson, back on the show once again after a fairly lengthy absence. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
Yeah, I'm good. Another day of Arsenal Twitter meltdown, but I'm good. Yeah, doing okay. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Honestly, today has been, the window opened 2 days ago. Yeah, actually, was it yesterday? I think it opened yesterday, and the Kai Havertz news dropped, and the player that we're going to talk about today, of course, is Kai Havertz. We had that chaos, had the whole first bid for Rice. Today we've had the whole, rejection of the bids and all the chaos around Caicedo, and yeah, goodness me, like it's caused a massive implosion on social media, unsurprisingly so. But we are going to stay clear of the Rice and Caicedo stuff and focus in specifically on Kai Havertz. The latest on the situation is, as we've been reported by David Ornstein, is that Arsenal have made their first proposal to Chelsea regarding the player. We've not heard regarding kind of the response of that proposal as of yet, but Chelsea are asking for around 70 to 75 million pounds, and the player is said to be very open to the idea of moving to Arsenal and has already apparently agreed personal terms with the club as well. So before we go into kind of the ins and outs of the player himself, how surprised were you to see this one crop up?
I mean, really surprised. I mean, obviously, everyone was just talking about Rice and Caicedo,
Well, you're a little bit crackly, Drew. I don't know if that's just me. You're a bit crackly, yeah.
Still?
Yeah. It was fine when we started. I don't know why it's gone all weird.
makes me sad.
Try a different microphone if you can, or take them out and put them back in again.
How about this? Is better.
No, it's really crackly now.
What about now?
Still crackly. Maybe try a different microphone. Oh, no, you're fine now. You're fine now.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not fine. No, I'm sorry. It's even worse now. This is great.
How about now?
This is me. It's me with the mic issues. Now it's you. Go on.
Is this better now?
Yes, now you're fine.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, the speaker was coming through my AirPods.
Oh, that's yes.
So I guess
amateur mistake.
Yeah. Whoops. But basically everyone was talking about Rice and Caicedo even before the season ended. So I personally did not ever see Kai Havertz to ever pop up on maybe our wish list, just because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions on who he is, what he is. A lot of that's based around a really poor, 2 or 3 seasons at Chelsea. But the more I thought about it, when I woke up, I was immediately kind of like, oh, well, I could get into it. But then when I thought back about who he was, who we saw at Bayer Leverkusen and what he brings to the table, I'm actually really excited about it. So I'm not too big up on the fee, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But from a player perspective and kind of the chat you and I and John had in the TGG WhatsApp yesterday, for me, I think it actually makes complete sense. But I do think 75 million might be a bit too steep.
Yeah, we'll talk about the price towards the end of the show, but for the benefit of finding out more about Kai Havertz and what he's like as a player, and to give people more of an insight, of course, we're going to look at the FBref profile of the player. It's a bombardment of stats, but there is a lot of green here, which is usually a really good sign for a player. What I would say is that these are in terms of his passing, his in-ball possession, his technical ability, and what he's like defensively. I should also point out that FBref uses these in terms of how they compare to players in their same position. So this is against other forwards in his role across the last year compared to other forwards in the top 5 leagues domestically, so league-wise. But what we see lacking, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, is when it comes to the shooting aspects, goals, shots, things like that. That's where he's fallen away in the last year. What do you make of kind of the balance of this profile, if you like?
I think the balance kind of makes sense. Again, if you look at kind of one of the key traits of players we've recruited, players that we've developed, the technical quality of the player is kind of what really stands out. And then as residually, obviously, their versatility on the tactics pitch. So that's kind of, for me, I think that's why Havertz has maybe popped up for Arteta and Edu. Technically, he's absolutely brilliant. And I know, again, a lot of fans have to kind of distance themselves from the misconceptions of who he was molded into at Chelsea, typically under Tuchel, who there was kind of a small sample size when Havertz was at Leverkusen when he featured as a false nine. I think it was 9 or 10 matches. He scored 8 goals, which is a really good return on the surface. And then kind of Tuchel saw that and then wanted to mold him into a center forward for Chelsea, but he's not a center forward at all. I think because he has such a great understanding of space, the runs he makes off the ball, the space he can create for others, he's good on the ball, he can come deep. So that's kind of all the traits you want to see in kind of like a false nine. But for who he is, that's really contingent on the system you're using. And with Chelsea, because they're so reliant on the wingback play, their buildup isn't really all that progressive a lot of the time. They clog central areas, so there's not enough space to be provided. So he just faltered in that aspect. And that's kind of another reason why Timo Werner didn't work out as well. So I think if you put him into an Arteta system where being so good on the ball and creating space and off-ball movement is so pivotal to how we operate, I think that those traits you see from his FP profile, I think will actually shine through more. And I'm not really worried about his goal-scoring numbers because I don't think we're going to be using him as a false nine. I think we're going to be using him as kind of in a dual hybrid 8-10 with Odegaard, with Rice behind him, assuming we get Rice and assuming we get Havertz. I think that's kind of where we'll see him shine. And he had a smaller sample size at Leverkusen where he actually featured as an 8 when Julian Brandt was still there, and Brandt was at 10. Havertz played in a more reserve role in the midfield 2, just behind Brandt, using that left-hand half space, making those late runs in the box, being creative, a late goal-scoring threat into the final third. So I think that's what you'll see from him if we bring him. And for me, I think that's a lot of people want us to replace Granit Xhaka, but I don't think we're replacing the player in terms of like a peg in another peg hole. It's more of we need another name for that position, but we're going to maybe evolve it another step further. And then that's kind of like we're constantly evolving as a side. I think that's what makes Arsenal so good under Arteta currently. So I think that's what we'll see from him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what I do want to discuss positionally is some people have suggested that he could replace Xhaka in this kind of left 8 role. And I want to move away, of course, from the labels of the Xhaka role, because every player that comes into the team and that Arteta chooses their own play. They're not going to do what Xhaka did because Xhaka is his own player. But what do you make of suggestions that he could play as an 8?
I mean, I don't think he will be a specific 8. I think, so for me, if you use the example of if we have, Havertz and Odegaard in the same midfield and then Rice behind him, I think you'll actually see Odegaard be the deeper of the two. Because we see in our own build-up, Odegaard will sometimes come back into our defensive third to pick the ball up, kind of like how Mesut Ozil used to do as well, for better or worse. And then he'll kind of dictate play from there, and he'll drive play forward, or he'll pick the pass or whatever, and he'll unlock the defense that way. So I think if you use those two ahead of Rice, and then you'll see Havertz kind of operate in that space where when Odegaard drops, you have to pick him up. And then that'll create space, and with how good Jesus is off the ball, Martinelli will cut in. You've got Saka dragging in place, so you'll see Havertz kind of operate in those pockets that open up, and that's kind of where he excels, to find the pocket to receive, and then he'll go on to get a goal-scoring chance, so he'll create someone else residually. So I think that's kind of where we'll see him. It won't just be how Xhaka was used, because he was almost exclusively kind of operating in that left-hand half space, drifting further out left, maybe turning creator from, just outside the box, coming back defensively to kind of cover for Zinchenko, but I think you'll see a different role for Havertz, even though he might be in the same position in the first 11, he won't be utilized in the same way, because I do think fans have to distance themselves from, like you say, and like John said yesterday, about players just coming in and then operating in the same way. It's Arteta maximizes who the player is and then tweaks the system to get the best out of the players collectively based off of their individual traits. I think that's what we're going to be looking at here.
Now, when we were chatting yesterday and we were kind of deciding which players that we would compare him to, we thought, well, at Arsenal, if he's going to come in, I think the most likely area in terms of the position he's going to occupy is going to be similar to that of a false 9, or of course that kind of attacking midfield position. But the false 9 is something that I think that Arteta would look to kind of compare and to move him into, to rotate with Jesus. I've seen suggestions, which I think is completely accurate, that if he comes in, Jesus could get more utilised in a wider area to rotate with Saka and with Martinelli. So with that in mind, we looked at comparing him to other players of similar ilks, like Roberto Firmino, Paulo Dybala, and of course our very own Gabriel Jesus when it comes to that as well. And what I wanted to make sure that we provided also was a comparison of his statistics, not only from last season, where obviously Chelsea struggled when that would affect the stats somewhat, but also have a look at his last season for Bayer Leverkusen in 2019-20. So we'll start with the attacking side of things. 7 goals, 1 assist last season compared to his 12 goals and 6 assists, which is the same as what Dybala got and slightly more than what Jesus and Roberto Firmino managed. But just to kind of go into that false 9 area, and while we're on these players and looking at their comparisons, do you think that it's a fair kind of look to compare him to these players and where he might move into the Arsenal team?
I mean, yeah, I'd say so. Firmino was a 10 at Hoffenheim before he, went to Liverpool, and he revolved into a false 9. I think Dybala, same thing. When he was at Palermo, he played as a striker a lot of the time, second striker as a 10, depending on who utilized him. Jesus, obviously, as a center forward, but can go out on the right. Havertz also has played on the right for Leverkusen before as well. So I think maybe the comparative profiles make sense overall. But again, that's only just like kind of those base traits and numbers, and we don't know how that'll evolve if he shows up at Arsenal and how we're going to kind of get the best out of him. But yeah, I do think those players do make sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. So moving forwards then and into some of the statistics, his non-penalty XG per 90 actually improved, ironically, compared to the final season where he was at Bayer Leverkusen from 0.31 to 0.38, but he didn't deliver the same number of goals. And I think that is the big kind of factor around confidence, what he's on right now, that confidence factor at Chelsea. We talk a lot about when he's using the wide area, and I think you sit there with your head in your hands when you see him playing in those wide areas, because it's really not how you get the best from him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and someone kind of just pointed out as well, when you're a false 9, really you're essentially like, kind of a half number 10 as well, a lot of the time, the way you drop. Mm-hmm. And Havertz really does excel in central spaces. He has to be involved. He likes to be always involved. And when you kind of chuck him out on the periphery, you lose so much of what he does. And kind of someone pointed in the chat that he would become Mikel Arteta's Ronaldo. I don't really think that's the case at all. I think the way Thomas Müller evolved that right side role, for Bayern and Germany is very different from what Havertz would be for us and what Havertz has been for Leverkusen. But I think they have similar traits in understanding space, which is what Ronaldo means. So, no, I do think that. To throw him out on the right, he had some success at Leverkusen, but again, the system is different. It was far more direct. I think when you're talking about an Arsenal system that is so based on possession and creating for space, I think he might do well there, but he wouldn't have the necessary output. And I think if you have to have him involved in the middle, similar with Odegaard, who has in the past played on the flank, whether it was in the Netherlands or even residually for Real Madrid, you didn't get the same player. Players like this that are so good on the ball have to always be on the ball, and they have to understand where the space is provided, and for themselves and for others, you have to keep them involved in there. So I do think that's kind of what you'll see with him.
While we're on non-penalty XG, I've only just noticed your X-Grump over 90. Brilliant. Perfection. Yep. Love that. In terms of his shooting, his shot accuracy, again, has gone up. We talk about the XG dropping and still being relatively low. And although I said the XG's gone up from the Bayer Leverkusen season to this season, he's getting more opportunities to shoot, 2.46 shots per 90 compared to 2.12. It's not as high as that as Firmino, Jesus, and Dybala. I imagine what we'd expect that to increase, though, significantly in terms of opportunities if he was to come into the Arsenal team with the service that he'd get from Odegaard, Saka, and Martinelli.
Yeah, I think it would increase, but also I think when you're being used as a center forward, obviously you get more chances at goal. Whereas if you're being used as he was at Leverkusen, you get fewer chances, really. And normally those chances are predicated on if you get the service. When he was making late runs in, he wasn't really always at that focal point necessarily. So, yeah, I do think that. I think he'll get better chances, or at least better, higher quality chances. I don't know if he'll get the same if he's not being used as a 9. But I do think the ones he will get, if he's being used kind of in the midfield that we talked about, I think the quality will be much better. And you kind of see it when some of the goals that Xhaka scored as well. They're very, very deep in the box, maybe within 10 to 12 yards. You can expect the same from Havertz. Some of the chances that Odegaard himself got just outside of the edge of the area, Havertz can pop up in that role as well. He has actually a very good shot on him as well. And you didn't really get to see that. Again, confidence is such a huge thing. And a lot of the times, because he's left-footed, a lot of the attacking moves that Chelsea had him on the end on was on his weaker right foot. You're not going to get the same thing. So I do think that again, little tiny minor adjustments that bring out the best qualities of a player, I think actually do matter. And you said it before, when someone lacks confidence, everything goes out the window. Their ability to finish, their their confidence in the final third, their ability to make the right pass, the smart pass, timely passes, all that kind of falls by the wayside when you're just not feeling it really. So yeah.
Lovely stuff. Moving forward in terms of kind of what he's like on the ball, in terms of touch in the box, he has again, increased in terms of frequency, but his take on success in terms of beating a man has dropped from 47.9% from his time at Bayer Leverkusen to 28.3% last season with Chelsea. That 47.9% he demonstrated at Bayer Leverkusen better than Dybala from this season, better than Jesus from this season, but again, I think we've covered it. It's this confidence from this, where he's playing in Chelsea, where he is right now as a player with Chelsea that's seen that drop. And we got to hope that Arsenal are able to kind of recover that confidence if he was to move. Shot creating actions. How do you rate him as kind of a creative player? Because, you look at those stats from his final season in Bayer Leverkusen, 4.47 shot creating actions per 90, better than Firmino, better than Jesus. But obviously, again, we're seeing a drop compared to when he's played last season with Chelsea.
I mean, for me, this might be harsh and there's probably a bit of bias in it, obviously, but I just think that Chelsea only scored 38 goals this season. That's the first thing. And yeah, I think they were third and fourth, the past 2 seasons before that. They scored more goals, but a lot of the chances they created were again, they were heavily reliant on wingback play. You get Reece James, Chilwell, while they brought in Cucurella for better or worse. So I do think that in a system that relies so prominently on its more creative players, especially in central spaces, you'll see more of what you saw from him at Leverkusen, where he was operating in that role. And it's not just about getting direct assists. A lot of his assists usually weren't at all. It's more of kind of like that pre-assist that people love to talk about. Making that pass just before that key created chance. He does that exceptionally well.
I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. Dio's special, and in fairness, Odegaard does that as well. We shot it from Xhaka as well, rather, this past season in that same way. He upped his goal numbers, but his assists were, they were okay, but so often he made that penetrative pass that kind of set up maybe Martinelli or Odegaard himself. So I think you'll get more of that from Havertz. So you'll see more of those kind of shot creating actions go up yet again.
And then moving into kind of sticking with the passing side of things, is passing into the final third and passing into the box. Frequently when he was at Bayer Leverkusen in that final season, playing in that hybrid 8-10 role with Julian Brandt, you saw that passing be a lot more frequent. Now he's playing further forward with Chelsea. That's dropped, unsurprisingly so. And if he was to play with Arsenal, I imagine you would probably see similar numbers in terms of passing to the final third. But it's those passes into the box, though, that do slightly concern me, because it's dropped again, even though he's playing in that kind of further forward position, 0.91 passes into the box per 90. If you're listening on audio, by the way, I do encourage you to jump over to YouTube, where you get to see all of the stats in front of you. It's much easier than hearing us talk through it. But yeah, what do you make of these ones?
Well, again, same thing. I think a lot of those numbers are going to drop just because of how Chelsea play, and because of how Tuchel wanted to bring him out as a number 9, as a false 9, and getting on the end of service, his passes into the final third are going to diminish, because he's going to be the one that's trying to receive, not the one trying to create. So I do think, again, those numbers will go up. And I think so much of the data on him from Chelsea is skewed because he's being used as a number 9. And I think while he maybe would residually be used there for us in rotation, if you chuck Jesus out on the right, if Nketiah maybe leaves the summer with Balogun depending, you might see Havertz play there maybe intermittently, but I do think he's going to be more of a more creative role for us. So all these numbers, I think, will trend far closer to what he did at Leverkusen than we did for Chelsea. I think that's really key to the discussion, because I see some fans in the chat, and thank you for your input, obviously, that they're saying that the numbers don't look great. But I do think everything about Chelsea is skewed. You're talking about Havertz at Chelsea as being used as a forward. I think he'll be used as a midfielder. I think that's the key difference. So I think it's more important to pay attention to the Leverkusen numbers than the Chelsea ones.
Agreed. Moving more into defensive side of his game, he doesn't actually trend like that well in compared to, like, say, Firmino or Jesus. Yet when you look at some of the physicality statistics that he's shown, especially on the FBref side of things, he actually ranks really well in terms of comparison to other forwards. So do you think we're just looking at two, when we come to kind of defensive-minded false 9s in Jesus and Firmino, they're kind of the peak options in terms of world football? Then you look at, say, someone like Dybala, and it's less so because 0.21 tackles won compared to 0.56 for Havertz this season. And yes, he's got more interceptions per 90, but still Havertz is trending well upwards in terms of what he's learned since moving to the Premier League.
Yeah, I kind of think so. I think, again, maybe in an Arteta system that demands a high press, and some of his FB numbers, you look at Havertz, he's actually quite good in the air as well, which I think kind of falls away. We'll talk about that later, obviously, but I don't think like the defensive side of this game is his strongest suit. I think, but that can always be adapted, especially when you're in a demanding press. Those numbers might trend up. Chelsea didn't always press as well, though his numbers look good. But I think a lot of those tackles were kind of in that middle and defensive third, because Chelsea's a little bit deeper. I think at Arsenal, he'll be tasked with having to press more. And you saw more of that from Xhaka as well. When we started to use him not as deeper, he started to go further forward. He started to gain a lot of possession back in the defensive third, in the middle third in transition, I think. And so those numbers trended up with him. I think you might see something similar with Havertz, although I don't have the speculation, of course, I have no way of knowing. I'm not necessarily all that worried, especially if you bring in someone like a Declan Rice, who his whole entire job will be to sit deep and cover for two creative central players. I'm not too worried about it, but I would expect and hope that Arteta would focus on kind of moving that up, or else I don't think he'd be able to survive being in a high press, high octane kind of system like that without the ball. So.
And then moving into aerially, we'll kind of finish on these, in terms of what is duels and percentage, winning those aerial duels. He beats Dybala, Jesus, and Firmino in this area. Obviously does have the height advantage, over those three players, which I think is worth pointing out. I've seen people in the chat box suggest he's not good in the air. Neil says he's not good in the air. I saw Jedi says Havertz is just a weakling, zero physicality, no creativity or aggression, languid style, no hold-up play or link-up play. He's a poor finisher. He's the exact opposite of an Arteta type of player. He doesn't make sense. Do you agree with these criticisms of his physicality?
No. If you want me to do it, I mean, I can expand on it if you want, but no, I don't.
Please expand, because I hate the misconceptions. People think he's not good in the air. He's not physical.
I do. Like I said, according to FB Ref, I think he won 2.71 headers per 90. And that's kind of being used more so as like a false number 9. I think if you put him in midfield, that number could also go even higher, depending. Xhaka was pretty solid in the air as well. You saw him win some key headers every week. So I think you might expect the same from him. Also, the way he can make late runs into the box on the end of aerial service, he did that quite a few times at Leverkusen. He would make far post or near post runs and receive from maybe an overlapping wing back, and he would kind of head on for that. So I think he's got two sides of his aerial game are actually quite good. Yeah, I mean, he's not. He might be a little bit lanky, but it doesn't really necessarily matter. I think it's how you use your body. It's not how much you weigh. So, that kind of can fall away as well. He's incredibly creative. I don't really want to get into that. I think the data side of that supports that he is. But again, in terms of his physicality, I think if you want to compare Kai Havertz to Granit Xhaka, yes, he's going to seem like he's not as physical. But again, I think that we're trying to fit him into a role that isn't going to be the same next season. And I do think, and a few fans have put into the chat as well, that if Arteta is really willing to spend, say, hopefully 50 or 60 million on him, there's a reason for it. And he's probably going to be a pretty prominent figure, especially if the reported figures of 200K a week are correct. He's going to be playing more often than not. And there's a reason for that. I don't think that, again, tactics evolve, players evolve. I don't think you can just sit here and kind of hold him, to the fire for what he was or what he wasn't at Chelsea, when it was clear to most experts that he was one of the more gifted players to ever come out of Germany in the last 30 years. So, I think look more towards that, kind of just separate from the rest.
Yeah, and look, when you come to like the idea of looking at players that have left Chelsea that didn't do well, like if you're judging players on what they did at Chelsea, I'm not sure you're necessarily going to rate the likes of Mohamed Salah and Kevin De Bruyne. Just because a player has not necessarily succeeded at one place does not mean that what is going to happen elsewhere is going to be the same. And also, I don't know how many times we have to buy a player. And when I say buy a player, I mean really invest. Look at I talked about it on this morning's show. Look at the investments that Arsenal have made. Other than Fabio Vieira, when you look at and even then, I think there's a player in Vieira that can come out in the future. But Ben White, Aaron Ramsdale, Zinchenko, Gabriel Jesus, Gabriel Magalhaes, Thomas Partey, Martin Odegaard. When we invest money and Arteta wants to push for a player, is my mic going? Have we got issues?
But
you carry on while I sort this out.
Well, no, I'll just kind of build on what you just said. I think, and it's funny because Arsenal, in its own relatively recent history, has two prime examples of players that stuttered after moves. Thierry Henry was not good at Juventus, even though he was brilliant for Monaco, and then look who he became at Arsenal. Dennis Bergkamp went to Inter and was absolutely shambolic, and then he came to Arsenal. Look what happened. So I do think it's so difficult to just sit there and hold players to, poor performances across however many seasons for clubs where it's so clear to people that know them before that they're just not being used the right way. I think you can take the most gifted football on the planet, but if you don't give them the platform to excel, they're not going to. And there are very few players that can move beyond that. And that you're talking about Messi, Ronaldo, whoever, people that are, they transcend football itself, kind of thing. Obviously, Havertz is not that kind of player, but I do think it's hard to sit there and say that I don't know a single Chelsea forward or creative or attacking player that has truly excelled in the last 3 years. Not even Mason Mount is the player that he used to be. And people were talking about Mason Mount being one of the shining lights for England for the next however many years. Now look what's happened. He might be leaving. So I do think that take it with 65 million grains of salt about who Havertz was at Chelsea. And kind of just look towards if Arteta wants him, I think it's because of things that maybe he saw in glimpses at Chelsea, but also who he was at Leverkusen. I think that's kind of the player that you're going to be getting. At least that's my hope and estimation.
Yeah, look, I think underestimate Havertz at your peril, to be honest. If you're putting out on social medias into comment sections that Havertz is this, Havertz is that, please don't delete them if he proves you're wrong, because I very much like to read them out. In terms of the verdict on him, I think from my side at least, I hope my audio is fine, by the way, now. It's £70 million plus is what Chelsea want. There's a feeling that Arsenal will be able to get the deal potentially closer. They're willing to pay around £60 million. That is a lot of money, for a project, for a risk. That's where my concerns in this come into. If I've got concerns about Havertz, obviously it's because there's a risk associated with Havertz. There's a risk associated with a project to kind of revive a career of a player that has got a lot of talent. The fact he's 24 is an attractive proposal in that sense. But it does seem like it's a lot of money still at £60 million. So what would be your verdict as a potential transfer for Arsenal?
I think it's the same. I mean, as much as I rate the player, it's hard for me to rationalize, 70 million plus. There's absolutely no way. And unfortunately, no matter his talent, you have to go on kind of what's been seen over the last couple of years. Also, the fact that he is open to the move. I think Chelsea will come down off it. And I know Mike at Gooner podcast is constantly talking about the fact that Chelsea are absolutely screwed financially if they don't shed a ton of wages and get a lot of fees back into the bank because of possible FFP sanctions. So I think the fact that we know that, and obviously you see people back down off Mason Mount as well for the same thing. Chelsea wanted 80 million. No one's ever paying that. It's like at Real Madrid don't want to pay 70 million for Havertz. Same thing. They like the player, but 70 million is a little bit ludicrous. So I do think I'd be more than happy with 50 million. The report of 60 million all in, if that includes wages and bonuses, I'd be fine with that too. I do think 70, 75 is way too much, and I wouldn't pay for it. As much as I like him, I think we'd have to move away from the table at that price. But I do think for 50 or 60, I would totally do it.
Yeah, we'll see. Look, we'll see what happens in the market. We'll see if Arsenal end up spending the money on Kai Havertz. But just like Havertz, if Arsenal are indeed linked to further players, you can be sure they'll bring in a tactical breakdown to you to give you all the stats, give you the verdict on the player. It's a risk, I think, is where I would end things. It's a risk of a signing. If Arteta thinks that it's the right move, if it's the player that he wants, I'm inclined to agree that indeed that he is, because I'm not being given any evidence really when Arsenal invest significant money in players that it's it's gone in a direction other than it's helped progress Arsenal forwards, and the players themselves have. So for that reason, I would be inclined to be very intrigued to see what Arteta would do with him. But Drew, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I very much appreciate it. Tell people they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MixedKidRemix, and there's a link in my bio about the work I do for 101 Great Goals. Actually, yesterday I wrote a piece about why Havertz would succeed at Arsenal under Arteta. So give that a shot if you want to as well. And thanks for listening again.
Absolutely. Thank you to everybody joining us in the chat box as well. We do have a super chat as well from Tom Sabol, who says, listen carefully, Arsenal fans are heading, or rather exploding one day into the summer transfer window. If, and it's a big if, we get Havertz, it's because Arsenal sees a hidden gem and feels that he can get the best from him. And I think that's a really good way of rounding off today's show. Leave us down below in the comments your thoughts of Kai Havertz and what you would make of the player. And I'd be very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on him. We will speak to you very soon. Of course, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., bright and early, giving you all the latest on the last 24 hours, of which it has been a hell of a last 24 hours. So it's going to be quite an interesting show to do. But thank you for listening. We'll see you soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.